Captain Jackson Hayes stood in the grand chamber of the Talrith High Command, feeling the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. The room was vast, its walls covered with intricate designs that shimmered under the pale light of the distant sun. The air hummed with an energy that was foreign yet strangely familiar. The Talrith, an ancient and proud species, had been his allies in a battle against a deadly enemy, and now they had summoned him for a reward. He had fought alongside the Talrith on countless battlefields, each victory hard-earned. They were strong, intelligent, and incredibly powerful, qualities that made them both allies and formidable foes. Yet now, Jackson found himself standing before the very beings who had once seemed so distant and unreachable. And today, they offered him a reward. As Jackson scanned the room, his eyes were drawn to two figures standing before him. They were not just any women. These were leaders of the Talrith, revered figures in their society, each representing a different aspect of the Talrith's vast culture. The first was Zara, a woman of imposing stature. Her skin, a deep shade of crimson, gleamed in the light as if she were made of fire itself. Her amber eyes, sharp and fierce, radiated a strength that could not be ignored. Zara was a warrior, one of the finest the Talrith had ever known. Her reputation on the battlefield was legendary, and it was said that she had never lost a fight. Her presence in the room was commanding, her posture straight and unyielding. She was a symbol of the Talrith's unshakable strength. Beside her stood Celine, a stark contrast to Zara in both appearance and demeanor. Celine's skin shimmered with a silvery hue, and her violet eyes held a calmness that could soothe even the most troubled soul. She was a diplomat, a scholar, and a strategist who had played a crucial role in forging the alliance between humanity and the Talrith. Her wisdom was unmatched, and her ability to mediate and negotiate had earned her respect throughout the galaxy. While Zara was the embodiment of strength, Celine was the embodiment of intellect and peace. The Talrith High Command had decided to offer Jackson a reward for his role in the war. And the reward, as they explained it, was simple. He could choose one of the two women to be his companion. The Talrith saw this as a great honor. Their society was built on respect for tradition and hierarchy, and such a choice was meant to be a mark of distinction. It was a rare privilege, one that few outside the Talrith species would ever have the opportunity to experience. Jackson, however, was no stranger to difficult choices. He had faced life-and-death decisions countless times, but this one felt different. He wasn't just choosing between two women. He was choosing between two vastly different ideals. Zara, the fierce warrior, represented the raw power and determination of the Talrith. Celine, the wise diplomat, represented the calm and calculated approach that had brought the Talrith and humanity together in the first place. As he stood there, Jackson felt the eyes of the entire Talrith High Command upon him, waiting for his decision. It was a decision that carried immense weight, not just for him, but for the future of the Talrith-human alliance. He looked at Zara first, meeting her fiery gaze. There was no mistaking her strength. Her presence alone made Jackson feel like he was standing before a force of nature. Zara was a warrior, and everything about her spoke of power and conviction. She was the kind of person who would never back down from a fight, and in some ways, Jackson admired her for it. But he also knew that her way of thinking, her unyielding commitment to strength, might not always be the answer in the complex political landscape of their galaxy. Then, Jackson turned his attention to Celine. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to Zara's intensity. There was an aura of peace about her, a quiet confidence that came from years of navigating the complex web of diplomacy and negotiation. Jackson had worked with her before, and he knew just how sharp her mind was. But there was something else about her, a gentleness, a kindness, that made her seem more approachable than the fiery warrior standing beside her. Jackson's mind raced as he weighed his options. He knew that this decision wasn't just about who he wanted to be with. It was about what kind of future he envisioned. The Talrith were on the verge of a new chapter in their history, and the future of their species might very well depend on the choices they made in this moment. As the silence stretched on, Jackson finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "I choose both." The words hung in the air, and for a moment there was complete silence. Zara's amber eyes widened in surprise, her sharp gaze never wavering. Seleni's violet eyes, on the other hand, softened, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles. The members of the Talrith High Command exchanged confused glances, unable to fully comprehend what they had just heard. Jackson stood his ground, meeting their gazes without flinching. He wasn't backing down. The Talrith had given him a choice, but Jackson was different from the other beings they had encountered. He wasn't going to be constrained by their traditions, their customs, or their expectations. He wasn't going to choose one over the other, because he didn't believe he had to. Both Zara and Selene were remarkable in their own right, and he saw no reason why he should have to make a choice between them. "I understand that this is not how things are done," Jackson continued, his voice growing more resolute. "But I am not from your world. I don't live by your rules. I came here to help your people, and I will continue to do so, alongside both of these women. They are both worthy of respect, and I will not dishonor them by picking one." The Talrith High Command was visibly stunned. This was unprecedented. In their culture, a decision like this would have been unthinkable. They had never encountered a human who would dare challenge their traditions so openly. But there was something about Jackson's conviction, his unshakable belief in his decision, that made it impossible for them to dismiss him outright. Zara and Selena exchanged a look, their eyes meeting for the first time since Jackson's declaration. Zara's expression was unreadable, but Selene's gaze softened even further. It was clear that she understood Jackson's decision, even if the Talrith Council did not. Jackson turned back to face the High Command, his eyes scanning their faces. "This is the way forward," he said, his voice unwavering. "You can either accept it, or we can go our separate ways. But I'm not going to apologize for my choice." There was a long pause as the Talrith debated among themselves, their whispers filling the room. Finally, the leader of the High Command, a towering Talrith elder named Vorith, stepped forward. He was ancient, with deep wrinkles etched into his face, but his eyes still held the sharpness of a warrior who had seen countless battles. "You are bold, human," Vorith said, his voice deep and resonant. "And perhaps, for the first time in our long history, we are faced with the need to adapt. Very well. You have chosen both." Jackson nodded, acknowledging Vorith's words. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that it was the right decision. The Talrith would have to change, and in a way, so would he. But one thing was certain. His path forward would be different from any he had ever imagined. The decision had been made, but Jackson knew that what followed would not be easy. The Talrith had never experienced anything like this before. His choice to take both Zara and Selene as his companions had thrown their society into turmoil. The Talrith were bound by tradition, and traditions were not easily broken. Jackson, Zara, and Selene were escorted out of the High Command chamber, the eyes of the Talrith Council following them, filled with both curiosity and suspicion. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. As they walked through the grand corridors of the Talrith stronghold, the weight of what Jackson had done began to settle upon him. Zara walked beside him, her posture as straight as ever, her eyes sharp, observing everything around her. She was a warrior, used to the battlefield where decisions were made in the heat of conflict. She was not one for diplomacy or subtlety, but there was something in her gaze, something softer than usual. Jackson had noticed it when he had spoken his choice. It wasn't just the surprise that had momentarily flickered across her face. It was a kind of understanding, a quiet respect for the way he had defied their norms. Selene, on the other hand, was quieter, her eyes thoughtful as she walked beside Jackson. She was the strategist, the one who could see multiple steps ahead, and Jackson knew that she was already calculating the implications of his decision. Her presence was calming, like a cool breeze on a hot day. Where Zara was fire, Selene was water, patient, steady, and adaptable. "I didn't expect you to choose both of us," Selene said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of amusement in it. "But I'm glad you did." Jackson glanced at her, meeting her violet eyes. He had expected her to be more shocked, more upset by his decision, but instead she seemed almost relieved. "I wasn't going to choose between you two," Jackson said, his voice steady. "Both of you bring something to the table that the other doesn't. I don't see why I should have to pick just one." Zara, who had been walking a few steps ahead, turned to face them, her expression serious. "The Talrith don't understand such a choice. They've always believed in the power of singularity. One leader, one companion, one path." "You've shattered that belief. I know," Jackson said. "But sometimes things need to change, and I think this is one of those times." The trio reached a large, open chamber at the heart of the Talrith stronghold, a place where only the highest-ranking members of their society were allowed. Jackson had been here before, but today it felt different. The room was silent, and the air seemed heavier than before. The Talrith Council had summoned them here, and the moment they stepped inside, Jackson could feel the eyes of the entire council upon him. The leader of the council, Voreth, was the first to speak. His ancient face, lined with years of wisdom and experience, was unreadable. "You've made a decision, Jackson Hayes, one that has not been made lightly. It is one that will have consequences not just for you but for the future of our people. You chose both Zara and Selene as your companions, defying the customs of the Talrith." "I didn't mean to defy anyone," Jackson replied, his voice calm but firm. "I just chose what felt right." Voreth's gaze didn't waver. "The Talrith have lived by our traditions for millennia. We value strength, honor, and unity. Your choice challenges those values. Do you truly believe that this path will lead to something better?" Jackson took a deep breath. "I believe that unity doesn't always mean conformity. Strength doesn't come from following the same path as everyone else. Sometimes it comes from creating your own path, even if it's one that no one has walked before." The council members exchanged glances, murmuring amongst themselves. Jackson could sense the uncertainty in the room, the hesitation. They were used to order, to structure, to a clear hierarchy. The idea of breaking from that was unsettling to them. But Jackson didn't back down. He couldn't afford to. Zara stepped forward, her voice strong. "Jackson speaks the truth. The Talrith have always prided themselves on strength, but that strength doesn't have to be a burden. We can learn from one another. We can grow together. Perhaps it's time for the Talrith to evolve." Selene nodded, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. "We can't move forward by clinging to the past. If we truly want peace and prosperity, we must be willing to change. Jackson's choice isn't a rebellion. It's a chance for the Talrith to open their eyes to a new future." Voreth studied them for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as if searching for something deeper. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low but filled with authority. "You've made your case, and though it is difficult for many of us to accept, there is truth in what you say. The Talrith have always looked to the past, but perhaps it is time we consider the future." Jackson felt a weight lift from his chest. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step forward. The Talrith were beginning to see that change might be necessary. But the journey ahead would not be easy. There were still many in the council and across the Talrith stronghold who believed that their traditions were unshakable. They would not accept Jackson's decision so easily, and Jackson knew that. He had always known that the road to change was never a smooth one.
I appreciate your willingness to consider this, Voreth, Jackson said. But I'm not asking for blind acceptance.
I'm asking for the chance to prove that this path can work for everyone. Voreth regarded him for a moment before nodding slowly. You will have that chance, Jackson Hayes. But know this, the Talrith will watch you closely. Every step you take will be scrutinized. Jackson nodded. He knew the stakes. He wasn't just representing himself now. He was representing the future of an entire species, a future that was uncertain and fraught with challenges. The council session ended shortly after, with Voreth making it clear that while Jackson's decision had been acknowledged, the Talrith would need time to adjust. Zara and Selene walked with him as they left the chamber, their expressions thoughtful. As they exited the stronghold and stepped out into the open air, Jackson looked at the two women beside him. He had chosen them both, and in doing so he had begun to forge a path that was uncertain, but full of potential. "Where do we go from here?" Jackson asked, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. Zara turned to him, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Wherever we need to go. Together." Selene, ever the diplomat, added. "We move forward, one step at a time." Jackson nodded, a sense of determination growing within him. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be those who resisted change who would never accept his decision. But he wasn't alone. He had Zara, he had Selene, and together they would show the Talrith and the galaxy that the future wasn't something to be feared, it was something to be shaped. The days following Jackson's decision were anything but calm. Despite his best efforts to stand firm in his belief that the Talrith could adapt and change, the tension within the stronghold continued to grow. The council had agreed to allow Jackson's unusual choice to stand, but many of the Talrith felt uneasy. Change was a difficult thing for any species, and for a race as ancient as the Talrith, the disruption of tradition was more than just uncomfortable. It was a threat to their very identity. Jackson spent most of his days in meetings, speaking with the Talrith leaders who were willing to listen. Zara and Selene stood by his side, offering their support. Zara's fiery nature clashed with the more conservative Talrith, but she was undeterred. She knew that her people needed to see strength, not just in battle, but in change, and she was ready to fight for it. Selene, on the other hand, was more subtle, using her wisdom and diplomacy to sway the minds of those who were hesitant. Despite their efforts, it was clear that there was a growing divide within the Talrith. Some of the more radical factions were openly opposing Jackson's decision, while others were beginning to see the merit in his unorthodox approach. The Talrith had never been a people to shy away from conflict, and the tension between those who embraced the new path and those who clung to the old ways was palpable. One evening, as the sun began to set over the Talrith stronghold, Jackson found himself alone in the council chamber, reflecting on the difficult journey ahead. The walls were lined with intricate tapestries depicting scenes from the Talrith's long history, battles, victories, and moments of great triumph. They were a proud people, and the weight of their past hung heavy in the air. "Are you all right?" Selene's voice broke the silence, and Jackson turned to find her standing in the doorway. Her violet eyes were soft with concern. "I'm fine," Jackson replied, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. "I'm just thinking. This is harder than I thought it would be." "I know," Selene said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "Change never comes easily, but sometimes it's necessary." Jackson nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling of doubt that lingered in his chest. He had come to the Talrith to help them, to forge an alliance that would strengthen both their species. But now it felt as though he was standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure of whether to take the leap or turn back. "I never expected it to be like this," Jackson said, running a hand through his hair. "I thought they would understand, but instead it feels like I've made things worse." Selene stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You haven't made things worse.
You've made things possible.
There are always going to be people who resist change. But you've already sparked something, Jackson. You've given the Talrith a chance to reconsider their future. That's a victory in itself. Jackson met her gaze, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I hope you're right. Before Selene could respond, the door opened again, and Zara stepped into the room, her fiery presence filling the space. You're both too quiet, she said, her voice strong and determined. What are you brooding about?
We're just talking, Selene replied with a smile.
Jackson's wondering if he made the right decision. Zara raised an eyebrow. Of course he made the right decision. The Talrith needed a wake-up call. And now, we're the ones who are going to show them how to move forward. Jackson chuckled softly. It's not that simple, Zara. People don't just change overnight.
They can if they see the benefits of it, Zara said, crossing her arms. I know the Talrith, Jackson.
And I know that they are strong enough to accept change. It will take time, but we can make it happen. Jackson looked at her, grateful for her unwavering confidence. She was right, of course. Change was never easy, but it was necessary. And if anyone could lead the Talrith into a new era, it was the three of them. The next few days were filled with tense negotiations. Jackson, Zara, and Selene worked tirelessly to convince the Talrith Council that their society could evolve without losing the values that made them strong. Some listened, others refused to entertain the idea. The divide between those who embraced change and those who resisted it only seemed to grow. Then, one morning, a message arrived that changed everything. Jackson sat in his quarters when the alert flashed on his communicator. It was from Voreth, the leader of the Talrith Council. His message was simple but grave. Meet me in the council chamber. We need to discuss the future of the Talrith. Jackson felt a sense of dread settle in his stomach. He had hoped that the Talrith were beginning to come around, but now he wasn't so sure. He turned to Zara and Selene, both of whom had been by his side through it all. I don't like the sound of this, Jackson said, his voice tight. Voreth wants to meet in the council chamber. I have a feeling this isn't going to be good news. We'll go with you, Zara said, her voice firm. Whatever happens, we face it together. Selene nodded, her expression thoughtful. We've come this far. We can't turn back now. Jackson felt a surge of gratitude for the two women. No matter what happened in the council chamber, he knew he wasn't alone. The three of them had already changed the course of the Talrith's future. It was impossible to go back to the way things had been. They made their way to the council chamber, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. As they entered, the room was quieter than usual. The Talrith council members sat in their seats, their expressions unreadable. Voreth stood at the head of the table, his ancient eyes fixed on Jackson. Jackson Hayes, Voreth began, his voice as deep and commanding as ever. You have been a catalyst for change within our people. But now it is time for us to decide if that change is something we are willing to accept. Jackson stepped forward, meeting Voreth's gaze. I'm not asking for blind acceptance, he said. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that change can be good for the Talrith. Voreth nodded slowly. We have considered your words, and we have come to a decision. The room was silent, every eye on Voreth. We will allow your choice to stand, Voreth said, but there will be conditions. The Talrith will not abandon their traditions entirely. We will embrace change, but we will do so on our own terms. Your path, Jackson Hayes, will be a difficult one, but we will walk it with you if you are willing to lead us. Jackson felt a rush of relief flood through him, but he knew the journey was far from over. This was just the beginning. The Talrith were willing to consider change, but it would take time, and it would not be without struggle. I'm willing, Jackson said, his voice steady. I'll lead you, but it won't be easy. We'll face challenges, but we'll face them together. The council nodded in agreement, and for the first time in days, Jackson felt a glimmer of hope. The Talrith were not just accepting his choice, they were choosing to evolve, to adapt, to embrace a future that was uncertain but full of potential. As the council session ended, Jackson turned to Zara and Celine, both of whom were watching him with quiet pride. They had done it. They had shown the Talrith that change was possible, even in a species as old and proud as theirs. Zara gave him a nod of approval. "We're not done yet, but we've made a start." Celine smiled softly. "One step at a time, Jackson. One step at a time." Jackson looked at them both, his heart full. They had made it through the first test, but this was only the beginning. The path ahead would be difficult, but with Zara and Celine by his side, he knew that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days following the Talrith Council's decision were filled with uncertainty, but for the first time, Jackson felt a sense of purpose that pushed him forward. The Talrith were a people who had stood firmly in their ways for centuries, and now, thanks to his choice, they were starting to consider a new path. It wasn't going to be easy, but Jackson was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. Zara and Celine, ever steadfast by his side, had been working tirelessly to help Jackson build bridges between the two sides of the Talrith society. The traditionalists who clung to the old ways and the reformers who saw a chance for a more progressive future. The divide between the two groups was deep, and it showed no signs of healing quickly. But Jackson knew that if they were to move forward, they had to break through the barriers of the past and show the Talrith the strength of unity. One morning, as Jackson sat at his desk, going over reports, there was a knock on his door. He looked up to see Celine standing in the doorway, her violet eyes serious. "It's time," she said, her voice calm but laced with determination. Jackson stood up, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. "I've been waiting for this." He had known for days that a critical decision was coming. The Talrith Council had been deliberating on how to integrate the changes Jackson had suggested, and today, they would present their final proposal. Jackson had been hopeful, but a small part of him still feared that the council might backtrack. The old ways were deeply ingrained in their society, and it would take more than just words to change their hearts and minds. Zara joined them as they made their way toward the council chamber. Her usual fierce demeanor was tempered by a rare seriousness. She had always been a warrior, focused on strength and courage, but this was a battle of a different kind. It was a battle for the future of an entire people, and Zara knew that the stakes had never been higher. As they entered the council chamber, Jackson felt the familiar weight of eyes upon him. The Talrith Council was gathered around the large table, their faces unreadable. Voreth, the leader, was seated at the head of the table, his ancient eyes narrowing as Jackson approached. "Jackson Hayes," Voreth said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "You stand before us today, not as a human, but as a leader of your people and of ours. The decision we have made is one that will shape the future of the Talrith." Jackson nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm ready," he said, though his words felt hollow against the gravity of the moment. Voreth motioned to the council members, and a tall Talrith woman with silver skin and deep blue eyes stepped forward. "We have considered your request, Jackson Hayes. The Talrith have lived for millennia under our traditions. The strength of our people has always been found in unity and order, but you have shown us that there is strength in diversity. Your decision to choose both Zara and Celine to challenge the customs of our society has made us realize that the future does not lie in rigid tradition." The woman paused, her gaze shifting to Jackson. "But that does not mean we are willing to abandon everything that makes us who we are. We cannot simply erase the past. We must find a way to integrate the old with the new." Jackson took a step forward, his voice steady. "I never asked you to erase the past. I asked you to look at the future. I'm not here to destroy your culture. I'm here to help you build a new one. One where strength and unity are not defined by a single tradition, but by the willingness to grow, to adapt. The council members exchanged looks, some nodding, others frowning. Jackson could see the internal struggle playing out in their eyes. They knew he was right, but the weight of their history was a difficult thing to shake off. It was easier to hold on to the past, to follow the rules they had known for so long. Vorith stood up, his towering figure commanding attention. "We have come to an agreement, Jackson Hayes. You are correct. The future cannot be built by clinging to the past. We must change, but we will do so in a way that honors our heritage. From this day forward, the Talrith will begin a new era, one that embraces both tradition and progress." Jackson felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew the hard work was only just beginning. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." Vorith nodded. "You have already shown us that you are a leader worthy of our respect. You have done what few others could, challenged us to see beyond our narrow vision and into the future." Zara stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "We'll make this work. The Talrith will rise to this challenge. Together we'll show the galaxy that unity doesn't mean conformity." Celine smiled softly, her eyes filled with quiet pride. "Change isn't easy, but it's worth fighting for. We'll help guide the Talrith through this transition." The council members, though still hesitant, seemed to nod in agreement. The path ahead would be difficult, but it was one they had agreed to walk together. The seeds of change had been planted, and now it was up to everyone in the room to nurture them. As the council session ended, Jackson stood with Zara and Selene, feeling a sense of accomplishment that he had not felt in a long time. This battle, at least, was won, but he knew the true test was yet to come. The Talrith were a proud people, and the change they had agreed to would be met with resistance from within their own ranks. But Jackson wasn't afraid. He had already faced impossible odds and come out victorious. Now he had to make sure the Talrith followed through on their promise. Later that evening, as the three of them walked through the halls of the Talrith stronghold, Jackson felt a rare sense of peace settle over him. The decision to choose both Zara and Selene to defy the Talrith's rigid traditions had been the right one. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. "I never thought I'd see the day when the Talrith would embrace change," Jackson said, his voice soft as he glanced at Zara and Selene. Zara grinned. "You've got to be the first human to ever do that." Selene laughed quietly, her violet eyes sparkling. "It wasn't just you, Jackson. We're in this together. We've shown the Talrith that strength comes in many forms. And now we'll show them how to build something stronger than they ever imagined." Jackson smiled, feeling the weight of his responsibilities settle on his shoulders. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a challenge worth facing. The galaxy had changed, and the Talrith had taken their first steps toward a new future. It wasn't going to be easy, but they had taken the hardest step already, admitting that they could evolve. And with Zara and Selene by his side, Jackson knew that there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. Together they would lead the Talrith into a new era, one built on unity, strength, and the belief that even the oldest of traditions could be reshaped for a brighter future.